Hey guys, Chelsea here from Making Manzanita, and today we're going to walk through the difference between a brad nailer and a finish nailer. So if you're anything like me, you are already overwhelmed with the number of options that we have in life for every little thing. I definitely get overwhelmed when I'm in store or online shopping for something like a new tool and I don't really know what I'm looking for exactly. So if you're in the market for a new nail gun and you're not sure whether to get a brad nail gun or a finish nail gun, hopefully by the end of this quick video, you're going to understand the difference between the two so you can purchase the right one. This video is also going to help you if you own both a brad and a finish nail gun so you know which one to grab when you're in the middle of a DIY project. All right. Let's jump in. We're going to start with the brad nailer. So what exactly is a brad nail gun? Well, for simplicity's sake, it is a nailer that uses smaller gauge nails. So when you're comparing it to a finish nailer, it's the smaller of the two. Now, when I say gauge, here's what I mean. It's the thickness or diameter of the nail, and it also is a representation of how strong the nail is. Here's a quick visual representation of the hole left behind from two different gauges. The top one there is a 16 gauge finish nail gun, and the bottom one is an 18 gauge brad nailer. So you can see here that the brad nailer leaves behind a much smaller hole to fill. Now, the number on the gauge represents the size shown in a fraction, and it's the bottom part of the fraction. So an 18 gauge is 1/18 of an inch. Now, since it's a fraction, the smaller the number, the thicker the nail. All right, now let's go back to brad nailers. So brad nailers are most commonly made to use 18 gauge nails. And you can also see 21 gauge brad nailers out there, which are even smaller, but those are a little less common. But if you get any smaller than a 21 gauge, it's usually called a pin nailer, and it's a little different. Those are 23 gauge typically, so those are smaller. So brad nailers can be either battery powered, like we're using here with this Milwaukee, or they can be pneumatic, which means it requires an air compressor for power. You would most likely use a brad nailer if you're going to be attaching small trim pieces and you want to prevent any large holes that you need to fill. Another time that you may want to use a brad nailer is if the piece of trim is very small and you're at risk of splitting it with a larger nail. All right, let's move on to finish nailers. So a finish nailer is slightly bigger than the brad nailer, and it's usually 15 or 16 gauge, which means that the nail used and the hole that it leaves behind is bigger. So the bigger gauge usually results in a stronger hold, and you can see here the difference again. The brad nailer just can't achieve that strong hold. And the reason that you would want to use a finish nailer is when you need a stronger holding power, if necessary, for your project. A finish nailer is considered more of a workhorse, and it can be used for a variety of different applications, and it provides you that hold that you may require for your projects. All right, let's summarize what we've learned. Brad nail guns should be used in your project when the surface or finish is more important. They leave behind a smaller hole and they have less holding power. You don't want to use a brad nailer on anything that may be heavy or have a lot of weight pressing down on it. The smaller gauge brad nails are not going to be able to hold as well as a finish nailer. For example, we used a brad nailer when we were attaching the wood pieces for this faux shiplap wall. It's a decorative type of wood and it doesn't necessarily hold any weight. As a result, the holes are very small and they were easily patched when we painted the wall white. Now, finish nailers should be used when your project requires a better, stronger hold, but it's a trade-off because although the hold is stronger, the holes will need to be slightly larger, so you need to be okay with that slightly visible patched hole on the surface. For example, we incorporated a finish nailer when we were building this tray with leftover cement tile. For starters, the tile was pretty heavy by itself and the tray needed to be strong to carry drinks or whatever we were going to use it for. Although the patched nail holes were slightly visible, the tray is nice and strong, so we considered it worth it. So that sums up the difference between a brad nailer and a finish nailer. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you feel more confident now when you go to grab either the brad or the finish nailer when you're working on DIY projects or when you're shopping to buy a new one. All of the nail guns that we use and own are linked in the description below, so you can check those out. And while you're here, we would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to our channel. We share weekly DIY and renovating videos just like this, and we think that you should check out this video next. All right, have a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.